to my mind, the ability to work with an actual late Renaissance painting is what led to the project. It's not something that happens often. We tend to rely on reproductions for research, or maybe if we're lucky, we get a print. Students do work on paintings in museums, but that's not something where their findings result in this level of research. They look at it, but they're not really working with that painting. To have that first hand experience was too great an opportunity to pass up. Our initial approach was less about leads and hypotheses and more about approaching the painting as what it is. It's a historical document. It just happens to be primarily figural rather than textual with, a beginning, middle, and end. So what art historians do is we start with the object, and the more you look, the more you see, which sounds kind of funny and kind of obvious. But since we live in a world where we're inundated with imagery, we tend to just, everything kind of flashes by like you're scrolling on social media and so forth. But to really stop and look and think about an object is what we started with. And that's how the project started. In my own work, I do a lot of archival research, and some of it is, being like a CSI investigator or Hercule Poirot of what's going on here and who did this. And we do this kind of research to figure out the facts about historical objects, because once we have facts, we can move on to interpretation. But unless you know where it's from and who's in it and those kind of basics, it's very hard to be interpretive and get to context. So we started with the object, and then there was a pretty substantial dossier of documents that the family had, particularly since the post-war period. And that included a lot of really important pieces of information, including a letter from the painting gallery in Dresden that confirmed that the gallery had acquired the painting the gallery had sold the painting at auction in the 1850s. And that was always something that had been kind of family lore. We were able to confirm that. And that was really important. We compiled a list of all of the variants. And probably the biggest challenge was figuring out the ledger. There's a ledger in the painting because the writing is pretty faint and it's abbreviated, and writing from 400 years ago, paleography, is very different. But this was a place where the internet really helped. There's actually a website devoted to figuring out historic Dutch paleography, because why not? And we posted that detail of the ledger of the painting. And within about 48 hours, we had multiple people from the Netherlands offering us insights. And it was great. And that's something where the students, being 21st century researchers, really helped us out. They were like, well, let's post it online. And my thought was, okay, but how, where? And they did it. In terms of, so that was fun and interesting and, again, unexpected. It wasn't a challenge. The challenges came from the genealogy research and learning about the owner's family and tracing this person married this person, these were their children, and recognizing that the records for family members just ended in, say, 1941 or 42, and knowing these were members of a prominent Jewish family in Germany who did not survive. That really brought things that made it very real in a way that just reading about the Holocaust is very different than having this experience of this object that was intimately involved with these people's lives. And that was that was emotional. And challenging isn't even the right word to describe it. And one of the things we focused on throughout was making sure that we could honor and respect the history of the family and the importance that this object, as one of the last surviving remnants of their existence prior to the war, we really felt like we owed that to this family, not just the owner today, but the family who, for the past 200 years has valued this painting. There are a lot of versions of the tax collectors or the money changers. And copies of paintings were a pretty common thing in the early modern period. And I think it's important we understand that a copy is a vastly different thing than what today we would call a forgery. A forgery is a fake where somebody has painted something and says it's something else for financial gain. We prefer to use the term variant because if somebody liked a painting, they would say, I want one, and another artist would copy it, but they would personalize it in different ways for the next for that patron. And so in this version, looking at the coins on the table, researching their designs, minting practices in the Low Countries helped us establish a better chronology for the work and a better idea of the date of the work. And to establish that with certainty, to say that definitively, would require scientific analysis of paint samples, wood shavings, the actual physical properties of the painting. But looking at those details definitely helped us better understand the history of the object. There are still things that we don't understand. About half of the variants have a pair of scissors hanging from a shelf in one corner, and about half of them have a parrot in that corner instead of scissors. Sometimes you can trace how something turns into something else, but we have not come up with any good explanation of why a parrot would be substitute for scissors. In terms of value, again, this leads us to the history of the painting and its involvement and existence in Germany in the 1930s. With any work, if one were interested in selling it, it's very important that an object has what's known as a secure provenance. And that is basically like the title on your house. Who owns it? Who sold it to you? Who had it before then? And any object that has spent any time in or has any relationship to Germany in the 1930s and 1940s is always questionable because the Third Reich did seize the possessions of Jewish families. And so there are multiple lost art databases that are still working toward returning the possessions to the heirs of those peoples whose collections were seized. We have established a provenance, the students have established a provenance for this painting that eliminates any question about its ownership and the authenticity and of the authenticity of the ownership or even the claims of ownership. The students have been able to establish a secure provenance that eliminates any question that this is an object that was looted and acquired in, say, the 1950s at an art market and so forth. We have an absolutely clean bill of sale here, taking it all the way back to the 1730s. And for an object that is 400 to 500 years old, that's pretty remarkable. And our students in this class accomplished that, and that is no small feat. The students did everything. As I said at our panel discussion, in as far as the seminar was concerned, I was sort of akin to the bus driver, but the students did the navigating. The students pulled the bell on when to stop. The students rerouted us when that was necessary. And I just tried to use my own abilities and familiarity and experience as an archival researcher to help them pose the questions and get the answers they needed to make their interpretive decision. To my mind, there were two big takeaways for them in terms of what they gained from this real world project. One of them was very practical, recognizing the importance of deadlines, the impact of decision making, the realities of working with a group, the commitment that true collaboration carries. They recognized pretty quickly that if one person didn't meet a deadline, that everybody else's project would stall. And all of the students very quickly stepped up and recognized, no, this is something that everybody is equally involved with. And one of the students did mention this was the only class they'd ever had at Santa Clara, where when they would get out of their other classes, they would rush to their emails and texts to see if there were any updates about this class. It was like, okay, because I've been out away from it for 2 hours. What's happened? And those are really important skills that will serve them wherever their post Santa Clara careers take them, whether it's in the arts or economics, which I know is where one of them is heading, or teaching, whatever they're doing, those are things that they've really experienced and had significant professional development. The probably other gain was much more emotional. And that, again, goes to learning about the history of family, their escape from Nazi Germany, recognizing that this object is the sort of last remnant of that family's existence from before the war, and discussing the events that occurred in Germany in the 1930s, and learning about art repatriation, learning about the lost art databases and the involvement of Nazi Germany with art theft and degenerate art, and those kind of things, I think, were really eye-opening for the students.